The darkness of the alien jungle was thick like smoke, silent except for the low hum of distant creatures watching from the trees, their eyes glowing faintly in the cold blue light of the twin moons. The human walked slowly, cradling something fragile in his hands. A tiny, trembling creature no bigger than a child's palm, its translucent skin catching the moonlight, its heartbeat quick and desperate. The tribe had laughed at him the day he picked it up from the riverbank. They called it weak, useless, destined to die. But the way it had looked at him, clinging to his fingers, had reminded him of the countless times humanity had been underestimated. It was the same look the galaxy had once given Earth, small, fragile, irrelevant. And like humanity, this creature would rise. Weeks bled into months. Hidden deep in the shadows of the forest, he built a shelter of steel and silence, teaching the creature to hunt, to stalk, to survive. What once shivered in fear now moved like smoke, silent, precise, deadly. The alien tribe whispered stories in the night of the dark beast that prowled the river's edge, of a pair of burning eyes that saw everything and left nothing alive. The Galactic Council, far away in their shining chambers, debated humanity's presence on this alien world. They thought the human was alone. They didn't know what he was raising in the dark. They didn't know that humanity always had a way of turning weakness into power. The first real test came on a night of heavy rain. Warriors from the tribe crept through the jungle to burn down the human's shelter, thinking they would end the story before it grew teeth. But the rain carried the scent of blood before they even reached the clearing. The beast, no longer small, moved like a shadow between the trees, its body covered in slick black scales, its jaw lined with curved fangs. When it roared, it wasn't the cry of a creature anymore. It was the sound of war. Warriors dropped their spears and fled, their hearts pounding like drums as their legends turned into living nightmares. The tribe's princess, proud and fearless, had been the loudest voice calling the human a fool. But that night, she too stared into the glowing eyes from the darkness and felt something new, fear. Word spread fast. The Galactic Council watched from orbit through their satellites, recording every moment, every hunt. Whispers echoed through the stars about the human who turned prey into predator, the man who raised a helpless thing into something that could change the balance of power. It wasn't just a beast now, it was a weapon. The alien tribes began gathering at the riverbanks, armed with fire and poison, determined to end what he had created. But they were already too late. Humanity had always been good at one thing, preparing quietly while everyone else underestimated them. The trap was already set. The river was lined with motion-triggered mines, energy snares hidden beneath the moss, and the creature itself, waiting in the dark, patient, loyal to the one who had given it strength. When the attack came, it wasn't a battle, it was a massacre. Warriors screamed into the night as the ground erupted beneath their feet. The beast moved like a storm, striking fast and vanishing just as quick. The rain ran red as centuries of tribal pride collapsed in a single night. The princess stood at the edge of the battlefield, her armor shining under the storm, her hands trembling despite the blade she held. She had been trained since birth to lead, to never kneel. But as the beast circled her, its growl echoing like thunder, and the human stepped from the shadows, calm, silent, unshakable, she understood that this was no longer her world. It belonged to something stronger. It belonged to them. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The creature lowered its head beside him, waiting for his signal like a soldier before a commander. Every alien eye in that tribe watched in silence as their princess slowly lowered her sword. Pride burned in her chest, but so did survival. She dropped to one knee in the mud, her gaze locked on the humans. It wasn't submission to the beast, it was acknowledgement of power, the kind the Galactic Council had once feared when they spoke the name humanity. The night was quiet again, but the galaxy would not stay quiet for long. In the months that followed, stories of the kneeling princess and the human's beast spread like wildfire. Alien empires whispered in fear, wondering what else humanity might raise in the shadows of forgotten worlds. The Galactic Council tried to intervene, but their fleets moved cautiously now, knowing that one human and one creature had rewritten the balance of power on a planet they thought irrelevant. Humanity had shown them again that strength isn't always born. It can be built, forged in silence, sharpened like a blade. And when the galaxy finally came knocking, what waited for them was not weakness, not fear, but something they could never control. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more HFY sci-fi tales where humanity turns the impossible into power. Your support helps bring these galactic stories to life, one star at a time. The jungle never forgot that night, and neither did the tribe, because after that storm, nothing on that world was the same again. The human and the creature vanished into the deep forests where no warrior dared to go, into that old valley of black stone and mist where ancient bones slept beneath the soil, where even the wind spoke in whispers. The tribe rebuilt their fires, patched their wounds, but their songs changed. They no longer sang of brave hunters and proud warriors. They whispered of glowing eyes that watched from the dark, of a human ghost and his shadow beast. The princess who had once stood tall among her people now woke each night drenched in sweat, remembering the beast circling her like a silent god. Her pride was shattered, but something deeper grew. A dangerous curiosity about the human who had done what no warrior could, who had bent nature itself to his will. High above, the Galactic Council tightened their surveillance on the planet, satellites circling like hungry vultures. They watched the heat signatures in the forest and saw how the creature grew at a terrifying rate, its muscle density far beyond what their biology teams predicted. It learned too fast, adapted too easily, almost as if the humans' methods had unlocked something primal. Council officials argued over broadcasts, some calling for orbital strikes, others demanding containment. But a few, the oldest and most cautious among them, remembered Earth's history, the wars humanity had survived, the way humans turned desperation into dominance. They warned the Council to tread carefully, because when a human teaches something to survive, it never stays small. Down on the ground, far from the Council's cold debates, the human walked beside the creature through the ruins of forgotten cities swallowed by moss. He had stopped calling it an animal long ago. Its intelligence grew with its size. It moved like a predator but watched like a soldier, its eyes scanning treelines the way humans once scanned war zones. He spoke to it softly in a language no alien understood, a language born of trenches, wars, and survival. It didn't speak back, but it understood. When he pointed, it moved. When he was silent, it waited. When danger came, it destroyed. This bond wasn't magic or fate. It was something far more dangerous. Trust built in the silence of the wild. One morning, before the suns rose, the forest cracked with the sound of metal against stone. Scouts from the tribe had returned, not with spears, but with strange weapons, cold, silver technology gifted to them by outside forces. The Galactic Council had chosen a side. They armed the tribe not out of loyalty, but out of fear. They wanted the creature contained, and the human erased before his story spread beyond the planet. Princess Liera, standing at the head of the armed warriors, didn't believe in mercy anymore. She remembered the night she knelt, the way her heart had burned with helplessness, and she swore she'd never feel that way again. She thought strength came from weapons, but she still didn't understand what she was truly facing. The human had known this day would come. Humans always planned for the inevitable. Deep beneath the valley of black stone, he had built something more than a nest. It was a fortress hidden in the earth, reinforced with scavenged alien tech, human strategy, and the silent power of the creature itself. He trained it not only to fight but to command the wild around them, to control the smaller creatures that answered its growl. The forest was no longer a home. It was an army. The moment the first alien soldier crossed the boundary of the valley, the ground moved as if it were alive. The attack began with fire. Orbital drones painted the sky with streaks of red light, and tribal warriors marched behind metal shields that gleamed like moonlit water. But the human didn't meet them on the battlefield. He vanished into the fog. The creature prowled through the undergrowth, not charging head-on but striking like a phantom. One warrior after another disappeared into the trees, their screams echoing through the valley as their formation shattered. The princess raised her blade high, shouting orders, but every time she thought she had control, something in the shadows moved faster. Above them, the council warships hovered, recording everything, sending live streams across star systems. Billions of alien eyes watched as their uncontrolled human broke a trained army without ever revealing his full hand. They saw fear spreading like a plague through disciplined ranks. They saw their weapons failing against teeth, claws, and a strategy no simulation could predict. And somewhere in the dark, the creature let out a roar so deep, so ancient, it froze the blood of everyone who heard it. By nightfall, the army's strength turned into panic. They weren't fighting a beast. They were trapped in its world. The princess, soaked in rain and blood, stood at the edge of the burning forest and saw a pair of eyes watching her from the treeline. They weren't the beast's eyes this time. They were his, the human's. Calm, cold, unshakable. He stepped forward through the smoke with no armor, no blade, only that silent command in his gaze. She raised her weapon, but her hands trembled again, and that tremor told her the truth. This wasn't a war she could win. The council realized the same thing. For all their power, for all their fleets, for all their careful control, they were watching an old human pattern rise again. The pattern that once turned small tribes on Earth into empires, that turned weakness into dominion. The human wasn't defending anymore. He was testing them. And the beast beside him was no longer just a creature. It was the beginning of something far larger. Something the galaxy wasn't ready for. The rain had stopped, but the air still smelled like smoke and iron. The forest floor soaked with blood and trampled leaves where the tribe's pride had burned. Dawn crawled over the valley in slow gray fingers, lighting the ruins of the warriors who had thought themselves invincible. The birds were silent. The smaller creatures had fled, and only the whisper of wind moved through the blackened trees. In the heart of it all, the human stood at the edge of the charred battlefield with the beast beside him, both calm in a way that terrified those who watched from afar. The Galactic Council's drones hovered high above like glassy vultures, recording every second. To them, this wasn't just a skirmish, it was a message written in fire. One human and a creature that shouldn't have existed had broken an entire fighting force that had the backing of Council technology. And the message was clear. The age of underestimating humanity was ending. The princess watched from a distance with the last of her remaining guards, mud streaking across her armor, her hair wet and tangled. She had seen the fear in her soldiers' eyes as they died, and she had seen something worse, the creature moving with a precision that no beast should have. She remembered the way the human's calm gaze met hers, not with rage, not with cruelty, but with a cold certainty that made her stomach tighten. It wasn't personal. He had simply decided to win. That made it more terrifying than any blade. She clenched her hands until her nails dug into her palms, but no amount of rage could bury the truth she now carried inside her. The old power of the tribe meant nothing against what he had built. High above, the council argued in their shining halls, their faces projected onto blue light screens as their voices layered over each other like a storm. Some demanded immediate orbital strikes. Others warned that destroying the human now might ignite a war they couldn't contain. They remembered Earth, the silence before its rise, the way humans never started wars in a storm. They started them in whispers, in quiet moves that seemed harmless until it was too late. The oldest counselor said it softly but firmly. Do not corner a human who has already turned the weak into strong. You will regret it. But fear always finds eager ears, and fear began to shape plans. Down in the jungle, the human was already working. He didn't need their broadcasts to know what was coming. He had seen it before, not in alien jungles but in the dark corners of human history. Whenever power shifts, the old rulers strike back, desperate to stay in control. He reinforced the hidden fortress beneath the valley, extended the traps, prepared escape tunnels, rerouted the energy cores, and trained the beast with a patience that came from a long legacy of survivors. It wasn't just growing stronger physically, it was learning to communicate with him through movement, through instinct, through a bond so tight it was like they shared one mind. What once was a creature was now a partner, a living blade in a silent war. The princess returned to her people and found a tribe broken, their proud songs silenced, their warriors gone. She could no longer lead them with empty promises of strength. In their eyes, she was the one who failed to protect them. That night, she stood before the sacred fire, alone, listening to the elders whisper about surrender, about giving the valley to the human and his beast to avoid more bloodshed. But surrender meant giving away their identity, their history, everything her ancestors had built. She couldn't accept that. Yet deep down, she also knew that fighting him the same way again would only bring more death. Her pride clashed with the truth like two blades grinding in the dark. She made her decision when the moon rose. She slipped away from her camp alone. No soldiers, no weapons except a single ceremonial blade carved with the symbols of her tribe. She moved through the forest like a ghost, following the scent of smoke and ash until she reached the valley again. She stood at its edge, the mist swirling around her legs, the trees whispering with the weight of something ancient. She expected to be attacked immediately. She wasn't. The forest didn't resist her, it watched her. And then, from the shadows, she saw the creature emerge first. It was massive now, its black scales catching the moonlight like obsidian, its breath thick in the cool air. It didn't snarl. It didn't lunge. It simply stared, waiting for the man who had raised it. When he stepped out from behind it, his face was unreadable. No rage, no mercy, just that same cold patience. She raised her blade, not to fight but to show she had not come as prey. Her voice trembled at first but steadied with each word. She told him that the council was preparing something bigger, something that would burn the valley to ash and everyone in it. She told him her tribe was breaking apart, that everything they had was crumbling. And then she did the thing her ancestors would have cursed her for. She offered him something no one had ever offered a human on this planet. An alliance. Not of equals, not yet, but a bridge between two worlds at war. He didn't answer right away. The beast circled her slowly, its massive head lowering to her level, its yellow eyes burning like small suns. She didn't flinch. She didn't run. She just stood there, breathing hard, hands shaking but unbroken. And in that moment, something shifted. The forest grew quiet, the night heavier. The human stepped closer, not with kindness but with a silence that said everything. He didn't trust her, but he respected courage. And that was the only currency humans truly valued. He turned away, but the beast stayed close, watching her as if weighing her soul. She understood then that trust wasn't given here. It was earned with blood, sweat, and silence. That night marked the beginning of something far greater than a battle between tribes. It was the birth of a dangerous alignment between a fallen princess, a human who had defied the galaxy, and a beast that had become a legend. The council didn't know it yet, but they had already lost the first piece of the war they were trying to control. Because alliances built in fear may be fragile, but alliances built in shared defiance. Those have burned empires before. The forest was different after that night, as if it too had felt the shift in the air, the quiet birth of something dangerous beneath the stars. The beast no longer hunted the tribe. It watched. The tribe no longer whispered of just a monster. They spoke of a shadow alliance they didn't fully understand. And the princess, who once stood as the face of their pride, now walked a path between two worlds. Her people, fractured and fearful, and the human, who commanded both silence and storms without needing a crown. She returned to the tribe with a calm face, but her heart was a storm of fire and doubt. She had offered an alliance to the very man who made her kneel. Some called her traitor behind closed doors. Others saw a leader trying to save what was left. And she knew that soon, none of their opinions would matter, because the real storm was coming from above. Far away in the cold chambers of the Galactic Council, the decision was made not with war cries but with numbers, strategies, and cold precision. They called it Operation Glass Veil. It wasn't meant to fight, it was meant to erase. Their fleets would not march down through jungles like the foolish tribes. They would scorch the valley from orbit, burning everything until no human, no creature, no forest remained. They wanted the problem solved quietly, cleanly, like they had done to a dozen other worlds where humanity had dared to rise without permission. But they had forgotten one thing that history had already taught them 1,000 times. Humanity doesn't wait to be erased. Humanity listens in the silence, calculates in the shadows, and strikes like lightning when the storm begins. The human had known something like this was inevitable. He had spent years in the dark, reading the council's patterns like a hunter reading the tracks of prey. Their arrogance was as predictable as gravity. For weeks, he had been building not just a fortress beneath the valley, but a trap that extended far beyond it. He had scavenged abandoned orbital debris, stolen signal scramblers from forgotten outposts, and buried shock pulse emitters beneath the soil like sleeping giants. He taught the beast to move through hidden tunnels, to use not just strength but strategy. The creature wasn't just his partner now. It was the blade in a hand sharpened against centuries of war. The princess came again at night, this time not as a messenger but as a conspirator. She brought no sword, no guards, just maps carved on thin sheets of alloy, showing the hidden paths her ancestors once used to reach the sky towers, ancient stations that could intercept and distort orbital signals. She placed them in front of the human in the flickering light of his hidden command room. The beast lay coiled nearby, its breathing slow and heavy like distant thunder. She spoke not as a proud heir but as a woman who understood the edge of a blade pressing against her people's throat. She told him the council would not negotiate. They never had. If they came, they would wipe out everything, her tribe, his fortress, the beast, the land itself. Her voice didn't shake. She wasn't asking for mercy. She was asking to fight. He listened in silence, the same way he always did. Words were cheap. Actions were everything. He looked at the map, then at her, then at the beast, which raised its massive head as if it too understood the weight of the moment. Slowly he nodded, not out of trust but out of shared purpose. And in that single gesture, the line between enemy and ally blurred forever. She would give him access to the old towers, and in return, he would give her tribe a future that didn't end in ash. It wasn't loyalty. It was war. Over the next days, the valley became a silent storm. The princess returned to her tribe with new orders. She rebuilt what was left of her people, forged steel out of fear, and silenced those who dared to resist. The human moved in the shadows, setting up signal traps and decoys that would blind orbital targeting systems. The beast prowled through the underbrush, dragging down any spy drones that dared to come close. They worked without fanfare, without speeches, each knowing that survival left no room for pride. When the council fleet finally arrived, it was beautiful in the most terrifying way. Silver ships hung in orbit like blades above a throat, their lights gleaming against the void. Council officers walked the decks with cold precision, unaware they were stepping into a trap set by the very species they thought primitive. Drones descended first, spreading like a swarm to map the jungle, feeding coordinates to the bombardment arrays. But something went wrong. The feed started glitching. Coordinates shifted and blurred. What should have been a clean strike turned into noise. Beneath the canopy, the humans smiled faintly in the dark. The first layer of the trap had worked. The second came with fire. When the bombardment began, the forest lit up with burning light, but not where he was. He had lured them with false signals, tricked their orbitals into striking empty ground miles away. In the confusion, the princess's forces emerged from the ruins, their guerrilla strikes sharper than any the council had expected. Explosive charges hidden in old roots detonated like thunder. The beast moved through fire like a shadow, bringing down dropships before they could deploy soldiers. The night sky turned red, and for the first time, the mighty fleets above realized they weren't hunting. They were being hunted. On the council flagship, alarms screamed. Officers shouted into comms, demanding stable targeting. But the signal interference deepened. Their scanners showed hundreds of heat signatures moving where there should have been only one human and a beast. He had learned from humanity's oldest wars. Make them see ghosts, make them fight shadows, let fear tear their discipline apart. Down below, the princess fought side by side with her tribe for the first time without the weight of her pride choking her. She saw what the human had built, how he had turned their fear into a weapon sharper than any sword. The beast tore through enemy lines with brutal grace, and behind it, the tribe moved like a single heartbeat, no longer fractured, no longer afraid. She realized in that moment why the galaxy feared humanity. Not because they were monsters, but because they turned hopelessness into strategy, fear into fury, and silence into victory. The night burned bright, the sky filled with explosions that shook the stars. But in the heart of it all, the human stood calm as always, watching everything unfold exactly as he had planned. The council had come to erase him. Instead, they had stepped into a war they didn't understand. And above the battlefield, for the first time, the princess whispered something she never thought she'd say. Not in fear, not in hate, but in awe. This is what they are capable of. And she knew then the galaxy had made a terrible mistake. They had treated the human as a problem to erase. But they had just awakened a storm. The sky over the valley burned red as the smoke from the shattered dropships drifted upward in long, twisting plumes, staining the horizon like blood. The night battle had ended, but war had not. In orbit, the Galactic Council's ships regrouped like a wounded predator circling its prey. On the ground, the jungle had been transformed into a maze of traps, scorch marks, and silence. The human stood on the edge of a ridge, his cloak torn, his face streaked with ash, watching the broken hull of a council scout ship still burning in the distance. The beast stood beside him, breathing heavily but unhurt, its massive chest rising and falling like the rhythm of war drums. Below them, the tribe moved like shadows, collecting weapons, burying their dead, preparing for what they all knew would come next. Not retreat, but retaliation. In the council's war chamber, panic wore the mask of strategy. Officers argued in overlapping voices, their data screens flashing with red alerts. One of them hissed, "One man and a beast," another corrected bitterly. But the elder counselors said nothing. They had seen this before long ago, when humanity was supposed to be weak, disorganized, fractured. Yet every time someone underestimated them, the story ended the same way, with fire. Now, their carefully controlled frontier world had become the birthplace of a problem they could no longer erase with clean strikes. They needed to crush him fast and crush him completely. But the human wasn't just defending anymore, he was preparing to break them. In the deep tunnels beneath the Blackstone Valley, his command center flickered with stolen council tech, hand-built transmitters, and lines of power conduits carved through the rock. He moved with the quiet focus of someone who had spent his entire life building weapons not to conquer, but to make sure no one could ever take everything from him again. The beast lay at the entrance like a living gate, its ears twitching at every sound, always aware, always watching. They had become more than man and creature. They were a single force, each understanding the other without words. The princess entered the tunnel, her armor scorched from battle, her hair tied back with strips of torn fabric. She walked past the beast slowly, every step deliberate, never breaking its gaze. It let her pass, not because it trusted her, but because he did. She reached the human as he examined a glowing map of orbital movements projected onto the wall. The council had positioned 3 heavy cruisers directly above the valley, supported by a swarm of automated drone bombers. Their next strike would not be as sloppy as the first. She knew this, he knew this, and somewhere far above, the council believed they finally had him cornered. She slammed her hand against the map, her voice low but burning with urgency. "They're coming to wipe us all out. Not just the valley, the forest, my people, everything." Her words echoed through the tunnel like a blade drawn in the dark. The human didn't look up immediately. He didn't need to. His mind was already ahead of them. He had studied the council's patterns for years, their clean tactics, their arrogance, their blind belief that technology always wins over instinct. That belief was their weakness. He finally raised his eyes to hers, and in that silent moment, she saw something cold and terrifying. Not fear, not rage, calculation. He began to move with purpose, issuing quiet orders to the few remaining tribe warriors who had earned his trust. The beast followed him as he climbed out of the tunnel and into the misty dawn. Around the valley, he activated hidden power nodes buried weeks ago, ancient alien infrastructure he had reprogrammed. Energy pulsed through the ground like a heartbeat, and the forest began to shift as if the land itself was waking up. The council had assumed the battlefield was static. But humans never fought on static ground. They turned the ground into a weapon. When the cruisers began their descent, their engines rumbling like rolling thunder, the human was already waiting. The princess stood beside him, watching the sky split open with silver light. The drones came first, swarming like a storm of steel locusts, their red targeting beams cutting through the mist. But they never reached the ground. The energy grid he had hidden beneath the soil flared to life, and the sky lit up with a pulse that turned the swarm into falling scrap metal. Thousands of drones rained down in flames, crashing into the trees like sparks from a dying star. Then came the bombardment. Orbital fire slammed into the jungle, tearing craters into the earth. But this time, the tribe wasn't running, they were already gone from those places. The human had shifted their entire movement pattern in advance, making the council strike nothing but shadows. And as the orbital cannons fired, he struck back, not with brute force, but with stolen council technology repurposed and sharpened. Deep in the valley, towers hidden under camouflage rose up like fangs, firing signal disruptors that jammed the cruisers' targeting systems. On the flagship, panic broke like a dam. Officers shouted over each other. Systems glitched. Targeting maps folded in on themselves. "He's inside our network," one technician whispered in disbelief. The elder counselors finally understood the truth. This wasn't some wild human living on a frontier world. This was a soldier, a strategist, and every strike they made only tightened the noose he had prepared for them. On the ground, the beast moved through the chaos like a shadow carved from war itself. It leapt onto burning wreckage, tore through crash teams, and vanished into the smoke before they could even track it. The princess led her warriors through hidden tunnels, striking at weak points, cutting supply lines. For the first time, her people fought not in fear, but in coordination with the human's precision. She realized with a jolt that they weren't fighting a war of survival anymore. They were fighting a war they might actually win. Above them, one of the council cruisers shuddered under the impact of a stolen missile launched from a hidden silo beneath the forest. It wasn't enough to destroy it, but it was enough to make the galaxy listen. A single human, a beast, and a small tribal force had just forced the most powerful military in the sector into retreating maneuvers. The shock of it rippled through every council transmission like a silent scream. As the smoke rose higher and the wreckage piled in the river, the human stood silently on the ridge again. The beast at his side lowered its head, its eyes reflecting the burning sky. The princess climbed up behind him, her breathing hard, her body bruised, but her eyes sharp with a fire that had never been there before. She didn't need to speak. He didn't either. They both knew this wasn't the end. This was the moment the galaxy would remember. The council came to crush him. Instead, they gave birth to something far worse for them, a legend. A story whispered in every star system. A single human who raised a creature the galaxy feared and forged an alliance with a broken tribe to challenge the greatest power in space. And deep in their silent orbit, the council finally understood the truth they had ignored for centuries. Humanity doesn't kneel. It builds storms. And when the storm comes, nothing stands in its way. The fires from the shattered cruisers still smoldered in the distance as the world fell into an uneasy silence. The kind of silence that only happens after something unstoppable has been set in motion. The jungle no longer felt like a wild place. It felt alive, charged with a pulse that carried the scent of war. The sky, once cold and silver, was now streaked with ash and black smoke curling upward like fingers reaching for the stars. The human stood on the ridge, his boots sinking into the scorched soil, watching the horizon. The beast sat beside him like a living shadow, its scales reflecting the faint glow of the burning wreckage. Around them, the tribe moved with purpose, not as villagers but as warriors forged in the fire they once feared. High above, in the Galactic Council's command chamber, the tension was no longer disguised. It bled through the edges of their polished words and perfect uniforms. Reports flashed across the walls. Orbital losses, drone swarms neutralized, ground assaults shredded before they began. What they were facing now wasn't a skirmish. It was the beginning of something they had spent centuries trying to prevent. Humanity had always been their greatest fear, not because of its numbers or its weapons, but because humans turned impossible situations into legends. The counselors argued over how one man, one creature, and one forgotten tribe had turned an entire fleet into chaos. But the elders didn't argue anymore. They remembered old wars, old stories, whispers of Earth's defiance that once made empires tremble. And they knew they had waited too long to crush him. The human didn't wait for them to come again. He was already moving. In the tunnels below the valley, maps glowed on the walls, showing routes across the continent. The princess walked beside him, no longer a figure wrapped in royal pride, but a commander wearing battle scars like armor. She listened carefully as he spoke in short, precise words. There was no grand speech, no flowery promises. Humanity didn't inspire with pretty words. It inspired with results. And what he had given her people was not hope. It was power. For the first time in generations, her tribe no longer whispered about survival. They whispered about victory. The plan was brutal and simple. While the council regathered their forces in orbit, expecting him to wait for the next wave, he would strike first. Not against their ships, not against their soldiers, but against their control itself. He had spent months hacking into their local communication relays through scavenged tech, mapping their blind spots, learning their rhythms. He knew where their command ships anchored, where their supply lines ran, and which weak link would bring the entire system down. The princess offered her warriors and their knowledge of terrain, while the beast would cut through anything that stood in the way. It wasn't a fight they were preparing for, it was a statement. When night fell, the jungle became their shield. Under the twin moons, a convoy of council transports descended into what they thought was a secured zone beyond the valley. But the ground beneath them wasn't just dirt anymore. It was laced with hidden explosives and energy snares buried days earlier. The moment the first hovercraft touched down, the earth roared. Flames shot into the air as vehicles crumpled like tin under a giant's hand. Out of the trees, the tribe surged like a tidal wave, silent and precise, striking with the speed of predators. And then the beast came. Its roar split the night wide open, echoing through the trees like thunder over a battlefield. It was larger now than any creature ever recorded on this planet, its black scales gleaming in the firelight, its claws tearing through the reinforced hull of council vehicles like they were paper. Soldiers screamed, their rifles useless against something that moved too fast and hit too hard. Above them, the human moved like a phantom, striking command units, cutting communications, leaving the entire ground force blind. The princess led the charge herself, her blade flashing beneath the moons. This was no longer about defending her people. This was about proving to the galaxy that they were not pawns. Every strike was a message written in blood and smoke. They would not be erased. She saw her warriors fighting shoulder to shoulder with the human strategies guiding them like unseen hands. And as the battle raged on, she finally understood why the galaxy feared Earth. Not because humans were monsters, because they made others stronger just by standing beside them. High above, panic spread through the Council's command fleet. Communications flickered. One by one, their forward units went silent. Drones sent to reinforce the ground assault were intercepted mid-air, dragged out of the sky by electromagnetic pulses. Their targeting arrays failed again, confused by the jamming towers hidden beneath the trees. The Council commanders shouted orders into failing comms, trying to keep control, but control had already slipped away the moment they underestimated him. As the last transport fell in flames, the humans stood in the clearing surrounded by smoke and silence. The beast prowled at his side, blood dripping from its jaw. The princess approached slowly, her armor cracked, her breathing hard, but her eyes burning like the forest around them. Her people gathered behind her, no longer fractured, no longer afraid. She met his eyes and saw no victory there, just the steady, dangerous calm of a man who knew the war wasn't over. This wasn't a battle won. It was a warning sent. The Council finally issued a red-level alert across their entire network, branding the human as a galactic threat. But they didn't say it out loud, not where the citizens could hear. Because if the galaxy ever learned that one human, one beast, and one forgotten tribe had humbled a fleet, the illusion of their power would shatter like glass. They pulled their forces back temporarily, retreating to regroup. And as their ships fled into the dark, the forest fell silent once more. The princess looked up at the sky, at the scattered fleet lights fading into orbit, and whispered quietly to herself, "They'll come again." He nodded slowly. "Good," he said, his voice low and steady. "We'll be ready." Because humanity had never been about being the biggest empire or the loudest conqueror. Humanity was about outlasting the storm, turning prey into predators, turning silence into war drums. What began as one man raising a helpless creature had now become something far bigger. A legend that would spread beyond this world, a whisper the council could not control. The galaxy had tried to erase him. Instead, they had forged him into a symbol. And symbols never die. The beast raised its head toward the stars and let out a roar that carried across the jungle, across the rivers, through the night, and into the sky where the council's ships fled. And somewhere out there, in the quiet corners of space, other humans would hear the echo. They would know someone had struck first. They would know the fire had already begun. The princess stood beside him, no longer an enemy, no longer just an ally, but something more dangerous. A believer. The tribe that once whispered in fear now roared with defiance. And as the night settled over the valley, a new chapter of the galaxy began. Not written by empires, but by the storm they had tried to silence. The human turned to face the tribe, the beast's growl rolling through the ground like distant thunder. "This isn't the end," he said quietly, his voice carrying in the smoky air. "This is where it truly starts." And above them, the stars burned on, watching a war they would never be able to stop. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more HFY sci-fi stories. Your support keeps these legends alive, and the next storm is already waiting in the dark.